The phone rang, cutting through the silence of my apartment. I was tired, my legs aching from another long shift at the garage, and all I wanted was to collapse on the couch with a cold beer. The neon lights from the bar across the street painted the walls in hues of pink and blue, casting eerie shadows on the worn wooden floor. I glanced at my phone, the screen showing an unknown number with a local area code. It wasn't the first time I'd gotten a call like this. A wrong number, a telemarketer, or worse, a debt collector. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button. I thought about ignoring it, but then out of nowhere, a thought popped into my head. What if it was something urgent? Something from the garage. I sighed and answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "This is Adam," I said, my voice wary. "Mr. Adam Parker." The voice on the other end was urgent, a woman's voice that sounded far too serious for my liking. "This is a teacher from Evergreen Elementary School. You need to come pick up your daughter right now. Alice is waiting, and we're about to close." "Where are you?" I froze. "Daughter. Alice." I stared at the phone, the words not making sense. "What?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "You've got the wrong person. I don't have a daughter. I'm single. I've never been married." Her voice didn't waver. "No, Mr. Parker. Alice Parker's file clearly lists her father as Adam Parker, with this exact phone number and Portland address. If you don't come now, we'll have to call the police. This is considered child abandonment. She's only 4 years old and we can't leave her here alone." My heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I hadn't heard the name Alice in years, not since, no. This had to be a mistake. There was no way I had a daughter. "I'm telling you, I don't have a child," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone must be using my name. Check the records again. Put the principal on the phone or something." She sighed, her voice growing more tense. "We've already verified everything. She has a family photo, and all the information matches perfectly. If you don't come, we'll have to call the authorities. She's waiting for her dad. Do you want to hear her voice?" A sick feeling crept into my stomach. I swallowed hard, fighting the growing sense of dread clawing at me. There was a moment of silence before I spoke again, my voice a little more shaken than before. "All right, I'm coming," I said, my hand trembling as I grabbed my keys from the counter. "Give me the address." The teacher quickly recited the address, then hung up. I stood there for a few seconds, the phone still in my hand as the weight of the situation started to settle in. This was real. Somehow, in some way, I had a daughter. A daughter I had no idea about. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. I grabbed my leather jacket and bolted out the door, the cold night air biting at my face as I stepped into my truck. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional car passing by. The rain had started to fall, turning the roads into slick mirrors beneath the headlights. I could barely focus as I drove, my heart pounding in my chest. The farther I went, the more questions piled up. Who was this child? Why was she linked to me? How was I supposed to handle this? Evergreen Elementary was a good 3-hour drive away, but it felt like an eternity. The wind howled through the trees lining the highway, their silhouettes casting long, twisted shadows in the headlights. The rhythmic wipers swiped across the windshield, but they did nothing to calm my growing sense of unease. I glanced at the road signs, trying to distract myself. The constant hum of the engine only made my thoughts louder, each one more chaotic than the last. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it briefly, half expecting another call from the school. Instead, it was a message from Jessica, my best friend. "You good? You seem off." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. What would I even say? "Hey, Jessica, turns out I have a kid I never knew about. No big deal." I shook my head, tossing my phone into the passenger seat. The farther I drove, the more distant everything felt. The rain grew heavier, the windshield wipers squealing as they struggled to keep up. Alice Parker. That name kept echoing in my head. The same feeling settled in my chest every time I thought of it. A feeling that twisted between confusion and dread. What was going on? I couldn't piece it together. All I knew for sure was that I was driving toward something that was going to change my life forever. The town where the school was located appeared in the distance, and a feeling of cold dread washed over me. I parked hastily in front of the school gates, my truck's tires skidding in the wet asphalt. The rain had slowed down to a drizzle, but the chill still clung to the air. The lights in the school were dim, and a single yellow light flickered above the door. I took a deep breath before stepping out into the cold, the smell of wet earth and rain filling my nostrils. As I walked up to the school, every step felt heavier than the last. The door was half open. I pushed it open cautiously, the squeak of the door echoing in the silence. Inside, a teacher sat behind a desk, looking both exhausted and relieved. Beside her, sitting on a chair that was too tall for her, was a little girl. When she looked up at me, my stomach dropped. Her eyes, those eyes, stared up at me with a familiarity I couldn't ignore. I blinked, my heart thudding in my chest. And then it hit me. This wasn't just any child. This was a child that looked exactly like my sister, Ariana, when she was little. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the little girl sitting in the chair. Her big round eyes looked up at me, wary but full of something else, something familiar. A shiver ran down my spine as the realization slowly crept into my mind. She looked exactly like Ariana. The same delicate nose, the same small mouth, and those eyes, warm brown with long curled lashes. It was like looking at a ghost from my past, but this time it was real. She wasn't just a memory. She was here. The teacher stood up as soon as she saw me, her face softening with relief. "Mr. Parker, you finally made it. We've been waiting over an hour. This is Alice, your daughter." I didn't move. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. I had a daughter I never knew about. The name Alice echoed in my mind, and my heart felt like it stopped beating for a moment. My hands shook as I stepped closer, my eyes locked on Alice's face. The girl didn't look like she was waiting for a father. She looked like she had been waiting for a stranger. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice coming out rough. "I don't have a child. There must be some mistake." The teacher raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Instead, she slid a thin folder across the desk towards me. "This is Alice's enrollment paperwork. We have complete parent information. You can look, but please don't waste any more of my time. Alice needs to go home." I hesitated, staring at the folder. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened it, flipping through the pages as if each one held the answer I wasn't ready to find. The name Alice Parker stared back at me. 4 years old, a birth date that matched the time frame when Ariana disappeared. My stomach twisted as I scanned further. The parents section, Father Adam Parker, Mother Ariana Parker. Attached to the page was a photo, a family photo. It was blurry, old, but unmistakable. It was Ariana. The photo was of her, with a sad smile, messy long hair, and a look of quiet resignation in her eyes. She looked so different from the carefree girl I remembered, but I still recognized her. I dropped the folder onto the desk, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Ariana, my sister. The one who had vanished 4 years ago without a trace. And now, this child, Alice, was linked to me. My mind spun with confusion. I hadn't even had a serious girlfriend in years, let alone a child. This didn't make sense. How could this be happening? I looked down at Alice, who was still staring up at me. She was holding a small, tattered doll in her lap, her tiny fingers clenched around it like a lifeline. She didn't smile, didn't say a word. She just looked at me like she was trying to figure me out too. "This has to be a mistake," I whispered, more to myself than to the teacher. "Ariana, she never told me." The teacher's voice cut through the silence. "We've verified everything, Mr. Parker. Alice has been waiting here all afternoon. Her file says you're her father." I shook my head, trying to process everything, but my thoughts were too jumbled. I was supposed to be at home alone in peace. Not facing this. Not facing a daughter I had no idea about. I looked back at Alice, and for the first time, she seemed to notice me in a way that made my chest tighten. She wasn't the scared child I had expected. There was no fear in her eyes now. Instead, it was something more like recognition. As if she already knew me. "She's waiting for you," the teacher said, her voice softer now. "She's been waiting for a long time." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it all. "All right," I said finally, my voice sounding more uncertain than I wanted. "I'll take her." I turned to the door, Alice's small form trailing behind me, holding my finger with a grip that felt strangely familiar. I walked out into the parking lot, rain still falling in the dim light of the street lamps. The cold hit me harder than I expected, but I barely felt it. My thoughts were spinning, pulling me in 1,000 directions. What did this mean for me? For Alice? For Ariana? I opened the truck door, and Alice climbed in without a word. She sat in the back seat, still holding on to that ragged doll, her eyes fixed on the window as the city lights passed by in the dark. I could feel the weight of her stare on my back, and it unnerved me more than anything. I had no idea what to say to her, what to do. This wasn't a stake I could fix with a conversation. This was a life I had never even known existed until now. I started the engine, the truck rumbling to life, and for a moment, the sound was the only thing that filled the silence. I drove slowly, not sure where to go, my mind still reeling. The road stretched out before me, a long, dark ribbon of asphalt under the headlights. Alice didn't say anything, didn't make a sound. She just sat there, watching the world outside. And me. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to figure out how this could possibly be happening. How had Ariana, my sister, been gone for so long? Why hadn't she told me about Alice? And why had she left without a trace? The farther I drove, the heavier the questions felt. But for the first time, I couldn't push them away. Something had changed in me tonight. Something that went beyond just a phone call or a name on a piece of paper. It was the realization that my life had just turned upside down. I was a father, and I had no idea what to do next. I drove in silence for what felt like hours. The steady hum of the truck and the occasional scrape of the wipers against the rain, the only sounds breaking the stillness. Alice sat in the back seat, her doll clutched tightly in her hands, her small body barely visible in the dim light of the truck. Every now and then, I'd glance in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flash of recognition in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by that same quiet emptiness. She hadn't spoken since we left the school. I didn't know what to say to her. How do you talk to a child you didn't know existed until an hour ago? And how could I even begin to explain the mess I was in? The more I thought about it, the more my mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of this bizarre situation. I kept thinking of Ariana, my sister. The last time I'd seen her was 4 years ago, when she walked out of our family's house. I hadn't heard from her since. There had been no phone calls, no messages. I had searched for her for a while, but eventually, I gave up. I thought she had moved on, maybe found a new life for herself. I never once thought about what might have happened to her, or that she could have been in trouble. And now here I was with a daughter I had no memory of, a daughter whose name I had never heard before tonight. Alice. I glanced at the road ahead, the headlights cutting through the rain as the streets blurred by. I had to figure this out. I couldn't just ignore this. Alice was my responsibility now. But how? What did I even know about being a parent? I had no idea how to take care of a 4-year-old. Hell, I didn't even know what she needed. She hadn't said a word to me, and that only made it worse. Was she scared, confused, or was she just as shocked as I was? Finally, I pulled into the parking lot of a small convenience store not far from my apartment. I had to stop. I needed to think. I turned off the truck and sat there for a moment, my hands still gripping the wheel, the engine's hum dying into the silence. "Do you want something to eat?" I asked, finally breaking the quiet. My voice sounded strange, forced. I didn't know what else to say. "There's a little store here. You can pick something out." Alice didn't respond at first, her eyes still staring out the window, unfazed. She was so small, so quiet. I wasn't sure if she even understood me. But after a long moment, she finally turned her head to me, her eyes meeting mine through the rearview mirror. "Okay," she said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and it sounded like she hadn't spoken much at all. I swallowed hard. "All right then, let's go inside." I climbed out of the truck and walked around to the back door, opening it carefully. Alice slid out with some effort, holding her doll tightly. I could see her shivering, even though the rain had stopped. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders as we made our way into the store. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, casting a cold glow on the aisles lined with candy, chips, and snacks. I felt like a stranger in my own life. "Pick whatever you want," I said, my voice softer now. "It's on me." Alice wandered down the aisle, her tiny feet tapping on the linoleum floor. I followed her, unsure of what to do next. She paused in front of a shelf with bags of chips, staring at them with a look of deep concentration. She picked one up and then put it back. Then she reached for a candy bar, holding it in both hands, her expression still distant. I didn't know if she was hungry, if she was tired, or if she was just unsure of what to do in this strange new situation. I leaned down to her level, trying to meet her gaze. "You like that?" I asked, motioning toward the candy bar. She nodded, though it seemed like the simplest of movements was taking all her energy. "All right then," I said, grabbing it off the shelf. "Let's get this." We stood in line, the cashier eyeing us curiously. I didn't blame her. I must have looked like a mess. My hair was a mess. I hadn't shaved in days, and I was now holding a candy bar in my hand like I knew exactly what I was doing. When we got back to the truck, I handed Alice the candy bar, and she took it without a word, unwrapping it slowly. I started the engine again, my mind still racing. What was I supposed to do now? Where do I even begin? I turned onto the road, the truck's tires splashing through puddles in the dim light. The city was quieter now, the streets empty except for a few scattered cars. I felt like I was driving in a dream, unable to wake up. I couldn't stop thinking about Ariana. Why hadn't she told me? Why hadn't I known about Alice before this? My mind kept circling back to the same questions, unanswered. And then, as if it had been waiting for the right moment, something inside me clicked. I wasn't alone anymore. Alice was with me. This little girl, who I didn't know, was now my responsibility. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window again, her small form curled against the seat. For a moment, she seemed so far away, like she was lost in her own world. But I wasn't going to let her be lost anymore. I wasn't going to abandon her like I had my sister. I couldn't. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time since this all started, I felt something shift inside me. I didn't know what was coming next, but I was going to face it. I had to. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, the truck's tires scraping over the wet pavement. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy, filled with a lingering dampness that seemed to seep into my bones. I turned off the engine, but the silence in the truck was almost suffocating. Alice had finished her candy bar, but she hadn't said a word since we left the store. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window again, her small hand resting on the edge of the seat. Her doll still clutched tightly in her lap. I didn't know how to begin. How could I explain any of this to her? I didn't even know where to start with myself. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to be a father, let alone deal with the mess that had been my sister's life. I opened the door and got out, walking around to the passenger side. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door and helping Alice out of the truck. She was so small, so fragile, and I felt a strange wave of protectiveness wash over me as I gently guided her towards the building. She didn't resist, but she didn't seem to acknowledge me either. Her eyes were distant, like she was in some place far away. The lobby of the apartment building was quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I led Alice down the narrow hallway to my apartment, unlocking the door and stepping inside. The place was small, nothing more than a one-bedroom with a cramped kitchen and couch that I rarely used. It wasn't much, but it was home. Or at least, it had been. Alice stood in the doorway for a moment, her eyes scanning the room, and I realized just how unfamiliar this all must have been for her. She had been waiting at a school just hours ago, and now here she was, in a strange apartment with a man she didn't know. I wasn't sure if she was scared or if she was just too tired to feel anything at all. I set her down on the couch, noticing how her tiny body seemed to disappear into the cushions. She didn't make a sound as I moved to the kitchen to grab something for her to eat. It felt wrong to leave her alone, but I didn't know what else to do. I opened the fridge, half expecting it to be empty, but there were a few leftovers. A sandwich from yesterday, some fruit. I grabbed the sandwich, cutting it into small pieces, and placed it on a plate. When I turned back, Alice was still sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, though the screen was blank. She didn't look at me when I walked over, but I could feel her attention on me. I placed the plate in front of her, my hands trembling slightly. "Here," I said, my voice hoarse. "You should eat something." But she didn't respond, but she reached for the sandwich, taking a small bite. Her movements were slow, as if she didn't have the energy to do more. I sat next to her, unsure of what to say, unsure of what was expected of me. How was I supposed to take care of this child? I had no idea what I was doing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the only sound in the room aside from the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sat there, watching Alice, watching her eat. She was so small, so fragile. I wanted to say something to her, to comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. What was I supposed to say to a child I had never met before? I could feel my own fear rising, my anxiety tightening in my chest. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I wasn't supposed to be responsible for anyone, let alone a child. But this was happening. This little girl was now my responsibility, whether I was ready or not. A small noise broke my thoughts, and I turned to see Alice staring at me. Her eyes were soft now, no longer distant. But they held something else. Something like curiosity, like she was trying to figure me out. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, though it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done. "Do you want to watch something?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She nodded slightly, and I reached for the remote, turning on the TV. The soft glow of the screen lit up the room, but it didn't do anything to chase away the tension. I sat there with Alice, the silence stretching between us. I wasn't sure how much time passed. It felt like hours, though I knew it couldn't have been. But every second felt like an eternity, and every minute I spent sitting there with Alice only deepened the knot of anxiety in my stomach. I couldn't stop thinking about Ariana. What had happened to her? Where had she gone? Why hadn't she reached out to me? Had I failed her too? I should have known. I should have been there for her, for both of them. And now, here I was, left to pick up the pieces. Alice finished the sandwich, her small hands wiping the crumbs away as she stared at the TV, her expression unreadable. I wanted to reach out to her, to ask if she was okay, if she had any questions. But I didn't know how to ask. "Do you want to go to bed?" I asked gently, trying to sound reassuring. She nodded without a word, and I helped her up from the couch. I led her to the small bedroom where I had a spare bed set up. The room was dark except for the small light from the hallway, casting long shadows on the walls. I didn't know how to make this easier for her, but I did my best to tuck her in, pulling the blanket over her small form. She didn't say anything, just stared at the ceiling, her doll still clutched tightly in her hands. I watched her for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Finally, I whispered, "Good night, Alice." Though she didn't respond, but I knew she heard me. I closed the door quietly behind me and walked back into the living room, my mind racing. I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in on me. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. I had no idea how to make this right. But I knew one thing for sure. This was my life now, and I had to face it. The next morning came far too quickly. I woke up to the sound of a small voice calling my name. At first, I didn't register it, still lost in the fog of sleep, but then it hit me like a wave. The reality of last night. Alice, she was here. She was my responsibility now. I blinked, pushing away the heaviness in my chest, and sat up, rubbing my eyes. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the world settling on my shoulders. My mind was still spinning from everything that had happened, but there was no avoiding it anymore. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had a daughter I hadn't known existed until less than 24 hours ago. I walked down the hallway to the living room, where Alice was sitting on the couch, holding her doll close to her chest. She didn't look up when I entered, her eyes fixed on the television. The same silence that had settled between us last night hung in the air, thick and unspoken. I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to break the tension. It wasn't like I had a manual for how to be a parent. I wasn't ready for this. "Hey," I said softly, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You hungry?" Alice didn't answer at first. She just stared at the screen, her small fingers absent-mindedly tapping the edge of the couch. I cleared my throat and walked over to the kitchen. "I'm going to make some breakfast. You want pancakes or eggs?" Still nothing. I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. I wasn't sure if she was just shy, or if she was still processing everything, but the silence felt like a brick wall between us. I made pancakes anyway, my hands moving through the motions mechanically. As I cooked, my mind wandered back to Ariana. I had spent so many years trying to forget about her, pretending she was just another casualty of the family's brokenness. But now, with Alice in my life, I couldn't escape the memory of her. I hadn't even known that Ariana had been pregnant, let alone that she had a daughter. Had she hidden this from me? Why hadn't I known? A small noise from the living room broke my thoughts, and I turned to see Alice standing in the doorway, her hands still clutching her doll. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking at me like I was a stranger, unsure of what to do next. I gave her a soft smile, though I could feel my own heart pounding in my chest. "Pancakes are almost ready," I said. "You can sit at the table if you want." She nodded slowly and walked to the small kitchen table, her small feet padding softly across the floor. I turned back to the stove, flipping the pancakes onto a plate. When I set the food down in front of her, she looked at it, but didn't touch it. I sat down across from her, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "You can eat, it's okay." Alice slowly picked up a fork and took a small bite, her eyes still downcast. The silence between us stretched out again, and I realized I was holding my breath. This wasn't how I imagined this morning would go. I'd expected something, some kind of connection, but it wasn't happening. Not yet, at least. Finally, after a few more bites, Alice looked up at me. Her eyes, still uncertain, searched my face, as if trying to make sense of me. "Where's Mommy?" she asked in a small, quiet voice. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I hadn't expected her to ask about Ariana. But it made sense. If this was her first time away from her mother, she'd be confused, scared. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. "Your mom, she's not here right now," I said carefully, my words feeling foreign as I spoke them. I'm going to make sure you're okay, Alice. You're safe now, all right?" She didn't respond, but she nodded once, her eyes still fixed on me. I stood up, walking over to the counter to grab a cup of coffee. The warmth of the mug in my hand did little to ease the cold feeling inside me. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to take care of a child, let alone the weight of the responsibility I now had. But Alice needed me, and I was all she had right now. I turned back to her, watching as she pushed the food around on her plate. Her face was distant, her thoughts far away. She was only 4, but she already seemed so guarded, so much older than her age. I sat down again, trying to think of something, anything, to say that might make this all feel less overwhelming. But nothing came. I looked at her again, her little hands still wrapped around the doll. And I realized then that she wasn't just here because of some mistake. She was here because of the life her mother had lived, and the choices Ariana had made. And now I was a part of that. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't change what had happened to Ariana, but I could change what happened next. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. "Hey Alice," I said, my voice softer now. "I know this is all a lot, but I'm going to be here for you, okay? We're going to figure this out together." She looked up at me then, her wide eyes studying me, as if she was deciding whether or not to trust me. The moment felt heavy, and I realized how much I needed to make her feel safe. And that was when it hit me. The reality of this whole thing. I wasn't just her father by name. I had to be there for her, be the person she needed. No one else was going to do it. I repeated, more to myself than to her. Alice picked up her fork again, taking another small bite. She didn't smile, but she kept eating, and that was enough for me. For now, it had to be enough. I sat back in my chair, watching her eat in silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And right now, that was all I could offer. The days following Alice's arrival passed by in a blur. Each day felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the reality of the situation. I'd wake up in the mornings, make breakfast, and try to figure out how to be the father this little girl needed. The silence between us wasn't as thick anymore, but it was still there, an invisible wall that I wasn't sure how to break down. I spent hours thinking about Ariana. I couldn't stop thinking about the choices she had made, the life she had lived in secret. But no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't focus on the past. Not now. Alice needed me. I had to be present, I had to show up for her, and I could afford to dwell on the past any longer. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, trying to unwind after a long day at work when Alice came into the living room. Her eyes were wide, her small figure framed by the doorway. She was holding something in her hand, something small and crumpled. She walked up to me, her feet padding softly on the floor, and extended her hand toward me. "Look," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I took the small object from her hand and saw that it was a photograph. Tattered and faded, the edges curled. It was a picture of Ariana taken years ago, when she still had that spark in her eyes. She looked so young, so full of life. There was a time when she had dreams, before everything went wrong. I felt my heart clench as I stared at the photo, remembering the girl who had once been my little sister. "Alice," I trailed off, unsure of what to say. How could I explain to her the things I didn't even understand myself? She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "Is this my mom?" she asked, her voice trembling with a quiet sadness. I didn't know how to answer. "Yes," I said softly, my throat tightening. "That's your mom. Her name's Ariana." Alice didn't say anything else. She simply turned and walked back to the couch, curling up with her doll again. I watched her, unsure of how to reach her. She had already lived a life that I couldn't understand, and now she was here, in my apartment, with me, a stranger in her eyes. I wanted to make it better, to somehow fill the empty space between us, but the truth was, I didn't know how. All I had was my promise to protect her, to be there for her when no one else had been. The next few days were more of the same. I would go to work, come home, try to make things feel normal for Alice, but nothing felt normal. It was like I was living in someone else's life, trying to play a part I wasn't prepared for. Then, one afternoon, I received a phone call. It was from the school. They were calling about Alice's enrollment, confirming everything that had happened. My heart sank as the conversation unfolded. They wanted to make sure I was the legal guardian, that I was able to take care of Alice properly. They wanted me to fill out paperwork. They wanted to know if I could provide everything she needed. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long moment, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on me. I wasn't ready for this. I had no idea what I was doing. But I had to do it. I had to take care of her. I looked over at Alice, who was sitting on the floor, playing with her toys. She didn't look up at me. I didn't know what she was thinking. But I had to be strong for her. I couldn't afford to falter. I had to figure it out. That night, after Alice had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the walls, my mind spinning. How was I supposed to do this? How could I be the father Alice needed? I didn't know how to fill the gaps, how to give her the life she deserved. I thought about my own parents, how they had shut Ariana out, how they had never really been there for her. And now, here I was, the one who had to make things right for Alice. But I couldn't even help myself. I stood up suddenly, pacing the room. I had to pull it together. I had to do better for Alice. I couldn't let her down, not like this. The sound of a door creaking open broke my thoughts, and I turned to see Alice standing at the hallway, her little hand clutching the doorframe. I froze. "Alice?" I asked softly. She didn't respond right away. Her eyes were wide, but there was something different in them now. She wasn't the same quiet child she had been when she first arrived. There was a glimmer of something else now. Curiosity, maybe, or something I couldn't quite understand. "Are you okay?" I asked, walking towards her. Alice stepped into the room slowly, her small feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. She looked up at me, her doll still clutched tightly in her arms. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she asked in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it. My heart swelled at the request. I didn't know what to say. Of course, she could sleep with me. I wasn't about to let her be alone. But I also didn't know if I was the right person to give her that comfort. I swallowed, my voice steadying. "Of course, Alice. You can sleep with me tonight." She smiled then, a quiet smile that lit up her face. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I took her hand and led her to the couch, pulling the blanket around us as she snuggled close. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in this. Alice might not be able to say it yet, but she needed me, and for the first time, I felt like I might actually be able to do something right. We sat there in the quiet, the soft sound of her breathing the only thing filling the room. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I could make this work. Maybe I could give her the family she deserved. The morning came much too quickly, but this time it felt different. I woke up with the weight of the world still on my shoulders, but there was something else now. A quiet resolve. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was doing this for Alice, for Ariana, and maybe, just maybe, for myself. Alice was still asleep beside me on the couch, her small form curled up next to me. The blanket had fallen off her in the night, but she didn't stir. Her breathing was soft, steady, and for the first time in a while, there was a sense of peace in the apartment. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake her. The apartment was still dark, save for the early morning light creeping through the blinds. I stretched, feeling the tension in my muscles from days of worry and uncertainty. But it was different now. I had a purpose. I had to take care of her. I stood up and made my way to the kitchen, the familiar sound of the floor creaking underfoot. The smell of coffee filled the air as I turned on the machine, the warmth of the brew filling the space. It was a small comfort, but it was one I had come to rely on. While the coffee brewed, I walked over to the small desk in the corner of the room. I hadn't looked at the paperwork the school had sent yet, but I knew I had to get it done. The thought of filling out forms, of officially becoming Alice's guardian, hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't been ready for any of this. I hadn't even known about Alice until a few days ago, but now there were things that had to be done. I had to get her enrolled in school. I had to make sure she had what she needed. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on my chest. I wasn't just an uncle anymore. I was a father now, and it terrified me. But as I looked back at Alice, still sleeping peacefully, I knew that there was no turning back. I wasn't about to let her down. I couldn't. I sat at the desk and began filling out the forms. My hand shook slightly as I wrote my name, as if I was still trying to come to terms with the fact that I was legally her guardian now. The thought that this little girl, who I had only just met, was my responsibility, my daughter, felt like a weight too heavy to bear. But I had to do it. I had to be strong for her. The sound of Alice stirring behind me broke my thoughts. I turned around to see her sitting up, rubbing her eyes as she yawned. She looked up at me with that same quiet, uncertain gaze. And for a moment I saw the fear in her eyes. It was there just beneath the surface. She wasn't sure of this new life yet. She wasn't sure of me. But as I looked at her, I knew this was what I had to do. I had to show her that she was safe. That no matter what happened, she would be okay. I stood up and walked over to her. "Morning, Alice," I said, my voice soft. She looked up at me, her eyes wide but not as distant as they had been. "Morning," she whispered back. I smiled, my heart swelling at the sound of her voice. "How about some breakfast? Pancakes?" Her face brightened a little at the mention of food. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice still soft but a little more sure. I made breakfast in silence, the sound of the stove and the sizzle of the pancakes the only noise in the apartment. Alice sat at the table, her doll still clutched in her hands. But she seemed more at ease today. Maybe it was the food, or maybe it was just the fact that I wasn't running away from the situation anymore. I had accepted it. I had accepted her. When the pancakes were ready, I set them down in front of her, and she picked up her fork without hesitation. The silence between us wasn't as thick as it had been. She wasn't smiling yet, but she was eating, and that was enough for me. I sat across from her, watching as she ate. "You're doing good, Alice," I said softly. She looked up at me then, her eyes meeting mine for the first time that morning. Do you think Mommy's coming back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit me like a punch. I had no answer for her. I had no idea what had happened to Ariana. I didn't know if she was coming back, or if she would ever be a part of Alice's life again. But I knew one thing. I was here now. I was the one who was going to take care of her. "I don't know, Alice," I said gently, "but I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me for a long moment, and then, for the first time since she arrived, she smiled. It was small, tentative, but it was there. A glimmer of hope. We sat there in silence for a few more minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that came with understanding, with the knowledge that we were figuring this out together. When she finished her breakfast, I stood up and cleared the plates, and Alice followed me to the living room. We settled onto the couch again, her small body curling up beside me. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could make it work. For her. And as I looked down at Alice, resting her head against my shoulder, I realized that the most important thing I could do was be there for her. The rest of it, the paperwork, the questions, the doubts, could wait. What mattered was that she knew she wasn't alone anymore. I had made mistakes before, but I wasn't going to make the mistake of giving up on her. Not now, not ever. The days began to settle into a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, not by any stretch, but there was something grounding about the small moments we were beginning to share. Alice had started speaking more, asking questions about everything, from the sky outside to what I did at work. She wasn't as quiet as she had been in those first few days. It was still a long road ahead, but I felt the faintest spark of hope that we might find a way to make this work. I was no expert at parenting, and I knew there would be days where I'd feel completely lost. But as I looked over at Alice, playing with her doll on the floor, I knew I had to keep trying. There was no other option. One afternoon, I was driving home from the store when I saw the familiar figure of Marcus standing outside his shop, leaning against his truck. He was a longtime friend, someone I could always count on to keep things light even when my world felt like it was crashing down. I hadn't seen him in a few weeks, and I needed a little break from the weight of it all. I pulled into the parking lot, and he waved as I stepped out of the truck. "Hey, Wyatt. Long time no see," he said, his easy smile making everything feel a little lighter. "Yeah, I've been busy," I said, scratching the back of my neck. "A lot's changed." "Yeah, I heard," he replied, his expression softening a little. "How's Alice? You doing okay?" I sighed, looking over at the truck. "I'm trying to keep it together, you know? Some days it's better than others, but I've got to be honest. I don't always know if I'm doing the right thing." Marcus nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "There's no right answer, man. But you're doing better than you think. You're here for her. That's what matters." I leaned against the truck, taking in his words. He was right. Of course. But it didn't always feel that way. Some days, I wondered if I was enough for her, if I could really be the father she needed. I'd never been good at asking for help, but here I was, trying to figure out how to give Alice a better life than the one she had before. "How's everything on your end?" I asked, hoping to change the subject. I needed to focus on something else for a minute. Same old," Marcus replied with a grin. "You know how it is. Work, beer, repeat." I chuckled, the tension in my shoulders easing just a little. "I hear that." We stood there for a few more minutes, talking about nothing and everything, the kind of small talk that only friends could get away with. It was a much-needed distraction, and for a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. "Hey," Marcus said, pausing as he looked at me. "If you ever need to talk, really talk, don't hesitate, all right? You're not alone in this." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on trying to do everything myself, trying to be strong for Alice, that I hadn't allowed myself to lean on anyone. Maybe I needed to learn to ask for help. Maybe it wasn't about doing everything on my own. Maybe I didn't have to carry all of it by myself. "I appreciate that, man. I really do," I said, clapping him on the back. "Anytime, Wyatt," he replied with a wink. As I got back in the truck, I felt lighter. Not because everything was perfect, far from it, but because I realized I didn't have to do it alone. I had people in my corner, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I didn't feel so alone. When I walked into the apartment, Alice was sitting at the table, coloring in a book. She looked up at me and smiled, and it hit me. This was real. She was here, and this was our life now. "How was your day?" I asked as I set my bag down by the door. "Good," she said, holding up a page with a drawing of a house and a tree. "I drew this for you, Daddy." I froze. My heart skipped a beat at the word. It wasn't something she'd said often, but there it was. My daughter, calling me, Daddy. It felt surreal. I sat down beside her and looked at the drawing, my eyes scanning the crooked lines and the vibrant colors. "It's beautiful, Alice. Thank you." I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down, trying to keep it together. I leaned over and kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. Alice smiled up at me, her face lighting up with a joy that was rare for her. For the first time, I felt like we were both starting to heal. That night, after she was in bed, I sat on the couch, the quiet settling over me. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore, though. It was the kind of silence that comes with understanding, with knowing that everything wasn't fixed, but it was moving in the right direction. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know exactly how to be the father Alice needed, but I was learning, slowly but surely, and I'd keep learning, one step at a time. For the first time since this whole thing started, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was starting to get it right. Maybe I could be the father she deserved. And maybe, just maybe, I could find my way out of the darkness I'd been carrying for so long. I looked over at Alice's room, the soft sound of her breathing the only noise in the apartment. She was safe. And I was going to make sure she stayed that way. I smiled to myself, a sense of peace washing over me. Tomorrow was another day, and I was ready for it. Together, we would figure it out.